Okay, we are live today on Lifestyle Medicine. We've got Kat Lee, who is a friend and colleague. We went to Five Branches together. Rock on, right?
Yeah, it's so good to see you and it's so good to catch up.
Yeah, likewise. I'm
It's
glad. I'm
been,
glad when we initially connected that you were down to do this, and you were like, "Yes, let's get on here. Let's talk about anything and everything that relates to the stuff that we're that we like to nerd out on."
yeah. And really, I just was like, just selfishly like wanting to catch up with you too.
Of
And so
course,
it's
yeah.
great that we get to do this in like such a public way, but it's
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely right. Everyone gets to watch, watch and listen. So, Kat, obviously you're a Chinese medicine practitioner and
Mhm,
acupuncturist, but
mhm.
give my audience a background into, yeah, I guess why you got into Chinese medicine. That's always a good place to start, and then where you are
Sure,
now and what you're doing.
sure. So, I like we went to Five Branches together. It was sort of this like weird thing where I fell into Chinese medicine school. I
Me too.
went to my undergrad thinking I was going to be a veterinarian, and then sort of in the middle of that schooling decided like I don't feel like I want to prescribe medications for the rest of my life, and
Yeah,
so like just fell into Five Branches. Had no idea what I was signing up for really, and
that's
and now I'm.
that's kind of crazy when you say that, because I was the same way. And when you say
Yeah.
you fell into it, was it because did you think, oh, this is just something I'll do because it sounds cool, more or less?
Mhm. Um, I knew I wanted to be in medicine of some
Okay.
sort.
Okay.
Um, and it was more of like the people that I was talking to at Five Branches just seemed like down to earth
Yeah.
and like pretty cool people. And
Yeah.
so I was like,
Good
like
peoples.
yeah.
Very cool. Okay.
So it was really just off of like the vibes of the school that I went.
Nice.
Yeah. And now I practice acupuncture here in Canada. I moved from California to work with my mentor in Canada. We do fertility medicine, and then I also have this side shoot project, this passion project of mine that is about relationship coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the two pieces that ties those facets together is that I really treat the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So with fertility medicine, it's less about like how do we fix this? Like I don't think about infertility as being a disease. I think of it as like an invitation back to yourself. Because there are so many ways and times in which like women are feeling so disconnected from their bodies, and in particular when it comes to reproductive health, until it's finally like, oh, like now I need a baby, and so like how do I just turn that on, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I find that when we work with the heart piece, that process is just such a deep learning experience. Um, so there's that piece, and then I do the relationship coaching on top of that. That sort of grew out of a necessity from the fertility piece, because when we start working with fertility, we start uncovering so many, whether it's familial traumas, working with like what your current relationship is like, and how are you not feeling like your needs are getting met, and then
Right.
that just sort of turned into its own thing. So I think along the way, it's just been about me following these little breadcrumbs that feel like, oh, that's interesting and that's curious, and so
Yeah.
just listening to that piece.
Wow. Well, I want to give a little context. It's very
Mhm,
cool to see the evolution of what you're doing and where you're going. I always like, especially people that I've known a while, just to see where we all, the places that we sort of find our groove into the Chinese medicine universe. So I really
mhm.
like to see, I like seeing where you've gone. And just to give the people that don't have a Chinese medicine background, I want to speak to this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on
Of
this as
course, yeah,
well. So when
yeah.
Kat was saying that she's addressing the heart, I've mentioned this in other podcasts and with people that I've talked to, but one of the things that's interesting about Chinese medicine is that they see that the organs in the body not only digest compounds, vitamins, minerals, but also this larger piece of thought and emotion.
Mhm,
And the heart is seen as the seat of all consciousness. That's the
mhm,
Shen resides there, the overarching presence, omnipresence, the eternal part of us, what you would call the soul. That larger construct sits in the heart. So when Kat's saying she's addressing the heart, it's not just the heart organ. You're talking about the spirit of a person, essentially.
absolutely.
And that's really important because I think we can all get behind intuitively that the heart and the spirit of a person matters. But also in Chinese medicine, this is a huge piece. There's entire lineages and subsects of Chinese medicine that really stress the importance of the heart, the spirit. If the spirit is not online, the physiological functions don't follow suit, and there's a lag, there's a stagnation. So those things. So to do that, I think, is really nice. I mean, that's a beautiful way to approach it. And I love that you said it's not a disease, because I know people, women in my life, friends of the, or related, by association, family members, friends of the family who have had fertility problems, and it's brutal. They go 4 or 5 years with just, the inability to have a baby or to conceive and just get that process online. And it's just brutal to watch them go through it, because they're so hard on themselves too. And there's these larger pieces of just things not moving well. And when when their spirit suffers something fierce, I mean, that's the biggest hit. So so me saying that, that the heart and the Shen and all of this, the consciousness in the heart, what's your take on this, and how has your understanding, I guess, grown and evolved given your background in Chinese medicine and what you're seeing in real time? How is it? Flesh that out for the people listening.
So there's so many layers and depths to that, right? Like, so just like on a physical level, the heart, we talk about that as being the controller of blood, right? And so everything from like menstruation, and so much of what we do on the physical level when it comes to fertility medicine is how do we nourish the blood, like using tonics to nourish the blood, and then how do we then circulate that blood so that it is feeding the eggs in the uterus, right? Or like when I work with couples, working with the sperm as well. So just like on that physical level, the heart like needs to be nice and strong, right? Like there's just that idea. And then there's this beautiful, like, I just love Chinese medicine because there's this poetry behind it, right? And I don't know if you remember, but we learned about the Bao Mai in school. And I don't know if you've, like for me, I didn't conceptually like understand what the Bao Mai was, because in Chinese medicine, we work with these points that fall along these meridians. There's this really beautiful system, right? And when you would talk about the Bao Mai, like the curious thing about the Bao Mai, which is when we translate it, it is called the uterus meridian. Bao as in like a dumpling, like a covering a sheath, right? But then, like, what the curious thing about the Bao Mai is that it is solely the only function that it has is to connect the heart and the uterus.
Wow.
And there are no points along that channel. And so I, as a practitioner, I have no access to that space. It's this beautiful sacred space that only the patient has access to. And so I'm finding that in my work, the patients come in and like you're saying, like your friend has been trying for 4 or 5 years, like we become disconnected and we have this like literal cutoff between the heart and the uterus. And so working to get the patient to feel safe enough to access that sacred space for themselves. But then how do we realign that, right? And I'll share this story with you. I had a patient who had been through just the most difficult of IVF journeys that you can think of. So IVF is in vitro fertilization. And so what she had done is she had gone through several IUIs, which is where they try to inseminate using the husband's sperm. And then they found that there was something going on with her eggs, and she went through an IVF cycle. That didn't work, and so then she moved on to I just want a baby. Let's just use an egg donor. And they had gone through 2 egg donors by the time she had seen me, and so these are eggs of women who are in their 20s, and so they're perfectly fine. Like her husband's healthy, and she came in and she's like, "I'm doing all the things right. I don't know what is going wrong." And she was totally right. Like diet's on point, exercise, meditation, like everything is on point. And what had happened is over the course of 4 or 5 years of going through this process, no one had actually checked in with her heart, what's going on with you, and how is this unfolding, and what are you learning from this, right?
Right.
And so I sat her down the first time I saw her, and I was like, okay, so what does this kid actually mean to you? And like just immediately tears,
right? It's breakdown.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
And just in the tears, there's release, right? Just in the tears, there's this like, there's this movement, and there's this like, oh, like maybe a twinkling of a connection between the heart and the uterus now happening, right?
Right.
And, you know, she's like, you know, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And like, this is something that a lot of women come in saying is like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Like they feel like if they can't conceive, they're doing something wrong.
Correct.
And so we started talking about like her visualization practice, and she was like, oh, like I'm, you know, thinking about holding a baby in my arms, you know, when my husband and I are going to sleep, like we're envisioning a baby between us. And I was like, okay, something feels a little bit off still. Like, is that actually what you want? And she's like, no, I'm terrified of babies. Like,
wow.
And she's like, what I actually want is I want a toddler who I can like teach and like show them the world. And I want to like be able to have conversations with this kid about like, you know, how to interact. And, and I was like, well, then that's the thing you need to be visualizing. Like you're by thinking about something that is close to, but not exactly what it is, she was armoring up. Right.
Yes.
Like, and then there's that hardening of that baomai, that connection between the uterus and the heart. There's that, like, we're hardening up between that space. And so this was going to be her very last IVF cycle. And this is going to be a third 20-year-old egg donor.
Man. Yeah.
And so she's preparing, and she's like, okay, so I have a month. And so that was the only thing she changed, is she just changed her visualization practice.
Yeah.
In our time together. And went in for her transfer. And I got this insane email. Like, I still like sort of well up thinking about it, because she was like, you will not believe it. A, the transfer took, and B, I didn't tell you this, but I've been thinking about twins the whole time, and I'm pregnant with twins.
Oh, wow.
And
wow.
And so like that there is just, I think that the body has just this innate wisdom, and it's so easy to get disconnected from that. And
it is.
And so that's why I love working with fertility medicine, is like, yes, I love the physical side of it, like the hormones and
sure.
You know, all of that stuff. Like I can totally nerd out on all that. And like, that's the due diligence that I do as a practitioner, to make sure that I'm fully equipped to understand all of that. But like, particularly with fertility and like, there has to be this room for magic. Like, there has to be space for source or universe or God, or however you want to characterize that.
Absolutely.
To play a hand in your life. And I was just listening, I didn't get to finish it, but I was just listening to your podcast with Kai.
Yeah.
And he talks about nourishing life and nourishing destiny.
Yes.
I think he had some terms for it, Yang Shen. Yeah. And I was just like, yeah, that's it. That's what fertility medicine is to me. Is it's just about like it's not just about the baby, because not everybody walks away with a baby, right?
Correct.
But it's about like, what value can you get from this aspect of your life? Like, what can you learn from this?
Yeah.
And how is this going to continue to shape who you are? Like, that's the juicy shit, man.
Yeah, well said. And there's so many things I could speak to, so I'm just going to jump in, because I had bookmarks. I had like 20 bookmarks. I'm like, fuck it. I'm not going to get to all of them. But so when you're talking about this, a number of threads come up for me, and it's for what I've seen from women that have struggled with fertility. Even men, right? It's just their emotional piece too, and how they relate to it. But there's a lot of emotionality that goes with this process. It's very complex. It's very difficult. But one of the things that has stood out to me, and what you were just saying, so this larger idea of what we call magic, of there has to be this open space that's beyond mind, that's beyond thinking, and it's beyond doing. It's not it's not the doing, it's not the checklist of all the shit you're doing correct, quote unquote. It's outside of that. It's beyond, it's the abstract, it's the nonlinear, it's the formless, it's the intangible. And that's a very difficult thing for a lot of Westerners, Western culture, that for us to get our psyche around that. So you know that I'm working with Lillian Bridges, the face reader.
Yeah.
She's amazing. And I love Lillian, and she teaches from the heart. She's very personable. I could call her on the phone right now and be like, Lillian, how are you? You know, her master status in the world, she doesn't wear it that way at all. She's just Lillian, you know, she's a sweetheart. And one of the things she talks about, though, is it's amazing how much she talks about sex, fertility, and creating life, whether that's a baby or just with yourself. And
creativity,
yeah, all of these things. She hits on these exact same threads, and she says, she's talked about it. She said, look, for babies to come in, a portal has to open in the construct of this 3D reality. A portal has to open that's a bridge between the immaterial and the material. And that portal is dependent. The way you open that door is dependent on a few things. Yes, you have to be taking care of yourself to a degree. She said, but what really opens the portal is this stuff you're talking about. It's the spontaneity, it's the magic, it's the moments between moments, it's the stuff that's more about being and letting go than it is about the checklist. Because this same thing, I've seen so many women, and typically what I've seen is a lot of type A where I've just got to have everything right, and I'm doing everything, and I've tried everything, and everything they tried doesn't work, and then that just kind of reinforces that I've tried this and it doesn't work, and I've tried this and it doesn't work. And then you get these stories of just like what you said. They peel back, they let go, they change a visualization process, they get in touch with spirit, whatever that means to them.
Yeah.
And then these miraculous things happen, and that's the thing that Lillian says is Ling. She calls it Ling. It's the magic and mystery of the natural world. That you have to accumulate this, you have to swim in it, you have to waft in it, you've got to saturate in it. And it has very little to do with doing. It has a lot more to do with being, listening, and receiving, and opening up that space. And it's a hard thing to put into words, because it's not about doing it. And it's kind of different for every person from what I've seen, you know, this process for each person. But it's fascinating to hear her talk about it and to hear you talk about it, because you guys are saying the same thing in slightly different terms. And I think it's something that gets overlooked all too often in this process. It's less about doing, and there's some other intangible things that have to happen. How do you relay these ideas to your patients when you're talking to them? And I would say for the Western, you know, non-Eastern mind, what have there been hurdles? Has it been easy? Is there a pushback? Are people completely receptive? What's been your experience thus far?
So before I jump into that, I just want to sort of like just nerd out for a second on this little piece here.
Of course.
So like, to me, the way that you're speaking about it is it's basically about yin yang. Right. And so like yang is like the part of us that is the action, the doer, the, you know, quote unquote more masculine, like not without putting, like we're not putting judgment or value on that. It's just like there's a masculine quality to it. And that's a quality that we value a bit more in Western society.
100%.
Like I was just talking to a friend of mine this morning, and, you know, if you make an excuse for like why you couldn't show up for something, if you just say like, oh, I was working, like nobody seems to question that. But like if you were like, oh, I just wanted to take like a personal day for myself, like people would be like, huh? Like, what's going on there, right?
Yeah, why are you doing that? Right.
And if in Chinese medicine we talk about the splitting of yin and yang as being death, right? There has to be, the opposite has to be true. Like, so the coming together of yin and yang is life. And so if we have this imbalance of yin and yang where, you know, the person is just doing. And again, without placing any blame, because the reality of that person, like you're saying, like type A women, that seems to be what floods my practice, is like I have accomplished everything in my life because I have been a doer, right? I have gotten all my achievements. I've gotten my job. I've possibly even gotten my partner through doing. And so this is the one place where I'm doing all the things that have worked for me in my life, and it's not working, right? And it's because we aren't able to balance it out with that yin. Like, we need to be able to like meet that yang with an equal amount of yin to be able to have life come together. And so that's the first piece, I think. And
can I say one thing to that?
Yeah.
So with the yin, what Kat is talking about, this is very normal speak for Chinese medicine people.
No, I love that you're really good at this. I feel like you've done this with all of the podcasts where you're like, translate.
Yeah, we have to translate, right? It's like part of my platform when I'm working with clients. I'm like, here's an esoteric idea, and here's the meat and potatoes of what that means. But when Kat's talking about yin and yang, what she's talking about, right, this activity and essentially rest, more or less, receiving, being quiet, going in, introspecting. And there has to be a harmony, right? That's the edge between those two things. And that is the piece. It's the opposite of type A. It's the like, let's not do shit. Let's sit back, let's coalesce, let's receive and be in that quiet space. And so I think those, metaphorically and literally in our lives, that's the way we have to think about this a little bit, is the rest and digest, right? The sympathetic and the parasympathetic, right? Water, fire. We have to have this oppositional thing, but we are proactively too active in the culture across the board. And so the piece that I think about when you're saying this is that, you know, I've listened to some women talk about how they're right, there's more doing, and they're detoxing. They're like, I've got to clean my body out. I've got to get in the sauna longer. I've got to clean out my body of the impurities so I can make my body more ready for this and that. And when I've talked to Lillian, she's like, whoa. She's like, first of all, if you're trying to create life, don't dump your resources.
Right.
She's like, even if there is quote unquote inherent toxicity in your body, she's like, that's part of life, but the woman has to replenish her body. She has to nurture so completely through
100%.
food. And Lillian's always of the mind, she's like, women need to put on some weight. They need earth. They need yin. If they want to get pregnant, that's not the time to diet and lose weight. But all of those things align with that doing, activity, push. Let me, you know, it's just a constant kind of bombardment. And that's just not the move. A lot of times it's like, whoa, yin. Yin is the name of the game. Conserve your fluids. Drink water, rest, eat bone broth, sit in your backyard, look at your flowers, smell the flowers, lay on the lawn, look at clouds, see the shapes in the clouds, you know, pick up, that's the kind of juice. So I just want to give context to people as you're saying this. I agree with you, and just some real-time examples of, of what you're talking about.
Which is a hard balance for people to strike, because I think that a lot of times we think it's either yin or yang.
Right.
The balance is not like I'm either doing or I'm not doing. And it's not this like, well, now that I'm going to be yin, like I'm just saying, well, fuck it, like I'm done. Like that's not what surrender and what receiving means.
Right.
It means that I'm still trying my best, and there's a level of detachment to the result, right?
Yep.
Like there's just a level of like, okay, so like what is going to be is going to have to be, right? And can I be okay without this baby? And it's usually at that point, that's when I see conceptions happen. It's like when you...
So what is that about, Kat? Because that I've seen the same thing. I'm not a fertility specialist, right? I'm not working with women in this area to create life, but that fucking story I have heard so many times. Women that are like, I tried for 12 years and I was like, fuck it, I'm out. I'm done. And then they got pregnant. So what is that? Because I mean, I have my ideas, but break it down for me. What do you think?
So I think physiologically what's happening is, like, again, like we're going to stay in the language of yin yang. Yep. When we're in yang, our sympathetic nervous system is being turned on. So that's our fight, flight, or freeze part of our nervous system, right? Right. And so what happens when we're in that space is a lot of blood circulation and energy goes up to our brain. because that part of our nervous system evolved from when we were humans running away from bears.
Yes.
And our nervous system doesn't understand the difference between I'm running away from a bear, I have a deadline at work, or I'm fighting with my partner, or I'm trying to get pregnant and it's the only thing that's consuming my life right now. And so blood circulation goes up to the head because your brain is like, okay, I'm going to have to problem solve. Like, I'm going to have to think through this,
yeah,
right?
Get my way out of this. But
yeah.
And
then blood circulation goes out to your limbs because you might need to fight off a bear. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what your body is thinking, right?
Right.
And then on the flip side, when we are in yin, when we're in parasympathetic, when we're in that space of like, I'm surrendering to this, what happens is that blood circulation goes to your digestive system and also to your reproductive organs. So I call it the feed and breathe mode because your body automatically knows when it's in that rest and digest, that feed and breathe, that yin part where we're trying to relax and trying to receive. Like your body's okay, now we're not in danger anymore. Now we can nourish the ovaries. Now we can nourish the uterus. Yeah.
That's very helpful because that gives a real time understanding for me, a way to think about it as well. And if you were, if there are people listening, and they are listening, so when you talk about, let's say, conserving yin, cultivating yin, what are some of the things that, like, the most practical? If women are listening to this and they're like, okay, so if I want to conserve my yin a bit, and just what are some real time applicable ways that you would suggest? Like, what do you say to your women? What are some baseline ways to do it?
Yeah. So this is going to sound stupidly simple, but just breathing.
Yeah.
Right? So when we breathe, our inhalation raises our heart rate. And then when we breathe out, our exhalation slows it down. Yeah. And so if you can take some breaths where you're extending that exhalation, then your nervous system automatically is like, oh, I'm supposed to calm down now.
Yeah. Ratchet down.
Right. And so for the women who come into my clinic where, they're doing, and they don't know how to stop because the doing feels safer than slowing down, where they can't find the patience between the, that 2-week window between ovulation and I'm about to start my menstrual cycle. Like, that's so hard for women. Yeah. Like, when that piece is just so difficult and I have somebody like that, I just start with breath, right? Yeah. Because if I'm going to send them out and I'm going to be like, oh, like, do a Qigong practice. And, if I give them things that are outside of their reach, then they're not going to do it.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
But breath, everyone has breath.
Yeah.
And even if it is like I'm standing in a grocery line and, I'm waiting for my turn at the checkout line. That's a moment where you can engage your parasympathetic. And more of those moments like that.
Yeah.
You're actually nourishing your eggs. You're nourishing your ovaries, your uterus. Yeah. So that's a really basic place from where I start.
No, it's a great place to start. And it's one of the most overlooked pieces, I think, in Western culture. People, I've talked about this before in my podcast and the little solo talks I do and stuff. But I've said this before. People in the West, or a lot of times when I work with clients and I talk to them about breathing, they're like, what are you talking about? I know how to breathe, bro. Like, I'm breathing right now. Like, what is that? And it's like, there's so much more to breathing than just the automatic, I'm alive, so therefore I am breathing, but taking control of your breath, directing it, focusing on it, feeling the physical sensations, getting your body into a feeling state. I mean, it's so important, and it's the changes can be radical in people's response, their physiology, how their day-to-day interactions improve, how their stress levels go down. I watched my actually I didn't see him, my mom told me about this, when he was in the hospital years ago. It's a crazy story. He was in Hawaii and there was a gust of wind and the umbrella started cartwheeling down the beach end over end and it stabbed him right.
Oh my God.
Right in his, like, God, what is that? Like right above the clavicle, and it went in and it punctured his lung and
God.
pressed his aorta down, I mean, and they said a half an inch in any direction, he would have been dead. But it went in, popped out, kept rolling, and it punctured his lung, and he was in the hospital. He survived. The guy's got like 9 lives. It's crazy. But my mom said, he, in the hospital, they were like, his blood pressure is just, through the roof. Mm-hmm. And Bob, my stepdad, had learned some kind of breathing technique because he'd always been very interested in Qigong. And he put his hands in front of his belly and, he did this breathing, and the doctors they said they watched his blood pressure just go down, and they were like, what the hell what was that? What was he doing? Like, they were like, I mean, it was a basic principle, but they're like, he's a yogi or something. Like, what the hell is this guy doing? Yeah. And it's amazing though, just to drive that point home. The breath has tremendous effect on the body, and it's the thing we can't live without, right? You can go food, God, months without food. Water, you can go, arguably 10, 12 days. I mean, you're hurting, but I mean, breath is minutes, you know? So it's that baseline. I couldn't agree more. Man. So, okay, Kat, go ahead.
And then, so like, just to sort of add on to that, like, next level is to me, it's acupuncture and processing your story.
Yeah.
And so like acupuncture, I think of it not as like, I'm trying to fix you. I never think of a patient and like think this person is broken. And actually that's one of the challenges and difficulties that I have about how we learn acupuncture actually.
Me too.
Is because we diagnose disease and we fix.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's actually true. I think that bodies are incredibly wise and our bodies are actually trying to tell us a story through their signs and symptoms. And it's our job to then listen and try to figure out how do we bring this body back into balance, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I think that that's where, acupuncture is so powerful.
Yeah. Acupuncture is a powerful tool. I mean, there's no getting around it. And it does. And I love that you approach it like that, because I think that's a fundamental piece that sometimes, it's overly westernized in our approach, right? Someone's got a disharmony. They have a disease. We have to fix it and turn the switch the other way. But that's very mechanistic, right? It lacks the anima or spirit of treating a person sometimes. Not always, right? But
and it takes the power away from the person.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
It puts the power back into my hands, and I actually don't think I deserve any of that power. My job is really just as a translator to help you be like, oh, like from my experience, when bodies do this,
right,
like, they're asking for this, right?
Yeah.
Rather than like, oh, I'm going to put in a point for your headache. Like that doesn't work for me. That model doesn't work for me. It never has.
Man, can I add one thing to this
as
well? Because we can bounce back and forth forever. Our first 6-hour podcast. So, when you were talking about this thread about, changing women's stories, right? Their dialogue, essentially, what's happening inside, how they're processing life. This notion of story and the magnitude and the importance and the relevance of story is really critical, because this is one of the things that I feel like is at the heart of Taoism and a lot of Chinese medicine. Different practitioners. Lillian Bridges talks about the power of story and how story is what changes the Shen, right? So when we read a face, she's like, you can see the anima, the light coming out of the eyes, the face, the glow, right? The brightness that comes out of the face. She's like, nothing changes Shen, the quality of that, like an aperture on a lens. She's like, that laser beam, that projection, she's like, is augmented by story. And so it's a big piece of how Lillian teaches. Everything she relates in story, very Taoist, she has, oh, really? This is a metal feature on a nose. Let me tell you about the CEO that I worked with whose wife was doing this. And she tells this story and you think, oh my God, she's going off on some tangent. And it's like, no, she's telling you a story. So you have context and emotionality to understand. And she's trying to get a shift in you. And are you familiar with Heiner Fruhoff? So you've heard of him.
Yeah.
One of the things that he talked about when he came to Five Branches and was at school and came and discussed with all of us as, fledgling students, he said he had heard about this very classical, famous doctor in China. And he had heard this guy just got amazing results, just turnaround in lots of syndromes in people. And so when he goes to meet this barefoot doctor, essentially, who's just this villager type, that doesn't, when he gets there, he meets the doctor, and as he goes out on his rounds, the guy leaves barefoot with a bucket. And he's like, so where are your needles? Where's your gua sha tools? Where's your acupuncture toolkit?
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't need it. He says, well, how do you practice Chinese medicine without those things? And he laughs. So he says, come with him. And so Heiner, who's fluent in Chinese, he said this guy would go to people and would ask them about their bowels, their what's happening in their bodies. And then in a very roundabout sort of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming way, would just start telling a story to them about something in his life or an idea. And people would have these huge emotional breakdowns. They would start crying. Sometimes the story would get them so riled up, they might throw up, they might feel nauseous, they might do all these things. And what it was ultimately pointing to was just this notion of the capacity for story to augment and shift the fabric of the stuff inside of us to the point where we get an opening and we're no longer bogged down by our bullshit. Yeah. And that's, I've always taken that, and I'm always trying to think. I mean, I think that's why I think our culture loves entertainment too, because we're so yearning for a story to move us. We all love it, it's like the mythos. So there's so many things that as you're talking about, it makes me think about the other way, the other side of the coin, the different vantage point to process this stuff and to work with people to give them, the opening and the portal to nourish life. It's such a cool process. Yeah. And it's really awesome that you're doing it with women, and at the same time it's applicable to everybody. Opening this portal for life, for creativity is it's important for the human experience, right? We all have to do it.
Yeah. And I think that there is just this, stories touch on this primal thing in us. We've been transferring wisdom and understanding and just culture through stories for generations and generations, And so I think that just what it's touching on is you're getting the mental piece of it. Right. By understanding the story, but then you attach an emotion to it, because I think that we are empathetic creatures. I think that that's the piece that that separates us from animals, is our empathy. And so when we can attach that emotionality, if we can put ourselves into that context, we can better understand, and really integrate the concepts that we're trying to integrate.
Agreed.
It's when we were learning herbs in school, I think I had to make up a story about each and every single one of them. Otherwise,
oh my God,
they were all just
oh, what a clusterfuck.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
I was like, what a shit show. This is how we're learning herbs? Just memorize, I love what herbs do. I take herbs, but yes, the context was, I was like, I had to, what was the zoo cards? The animal stories, of, it was exactly, I was like, I need a story. Give me something with these herbs so I can, I totally relate.
Yeah. So for me, it's I've always had to make friends through stories, right? So herbs, points are the same way for me. Yeah. Each and every one of the points that I use is a friend of mine. There's, I don't know how many hundreds of points there are, but I tend to pick from maybe 25 or 30 points, because those are my 30 best friends. Yes. And I just have a full understanding of what they're capable of. Yes. What their physiology is, what their energetic is. Right. Same thing with herbs. I think I probably work with maybe 40 herbs max.
Yeah. That's very, do you study Jeffrey Yuen's work at all?
I've been dying to.
You're taking a page right out of his book. And that's the way Jeffrey approaches points. That's how he approaches herbs. And for the people listening, Jeffrey Yuen is a prolific Chinese medicine practitioner and is world renowned. He's amazing. And he's classically trained, oral tradition all the way. Yeah. But that's exactly what he says. He said, and to add to what you're saying, that's exactly right. He said, the friendship, the familial relationship you have with points and with herbs is what makes them work.
Absolutely.
If that's not there,
100%, yeah.
If that's not there, you're playing with, yes, you can get a mechanistic response. You put a point in, you can get things to change in the body. You might get hydrochloric acid in the stomach to move. He said, but if you want dynamic integration and systemic movement, you better have a relationship, because that's what separates Eastern and Western medicine, right? Is that the nature of intention in relation to the body, what you're doing and how you're interfacing with somebody. Right. So that's cool that you are doing that, because that's right up his alley. You're in good company.
That's very flattering. Right?
Yeah. You and Jeffrey.
Yeah. But to sort of speak to that, because I think if we're working with physical bodies and like we are not just physical things. And so like the idea I like to give is like our bodies are made up of organs, which are made up of, cells, which are made up of molecules, which are then made up of atoms.
Right.
And if you break down what an atom is, it is a neutron, a proton, and electrons. And like 99% of that is space.
Empty space.
It's just empty space.
Yeah.
Right. And so like when you have a relationship with the points, if you have a relationship with the herb and you are putting your own intention behind it, and this is one of my favorite things to do with patients, is like I don't just stick points in patients. Like I try to tell them a story. Yeah. About why I'm doing things, because I want their intention involved in the healing process, right? And so like when you're working with story, you're actually affecting the 99%, that potential energy. It's not just kinetic energy anymore.
Right.
And so like if, I think the parallel that I want to make is like, yes, medicine, pharmaceuticals, they work a lot of the time. Yeah. But a lot of the times they don't work. And the reason for that is because we aren't working on the energetics of it. Yeah. Right? Like we are just treating our bodies like we are machines. And yes, if there is a broken part to the machine, Western medicine is amazing. Yeah. Right?
They kick ass there.
Yeah.
They really do. Yeah.
But then if you're working on the human potential, like Western medicine has no bearing on what we have with Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, like all these ancient traditions. Like they've been around for a reason, right?
Yeah, they've survived with great efficacy for that reason exactly. Yeah.
And this is also why we can't study it, right?
Yeah. Like, right, which is like the total mindfuck, right? Is that I have this working. I want to write a book, and I'm going to someday. But I've batted around titles, and one of the who knows if it would stick, but I've always wanted to write a book that's something to the effect of cultivating the intangible, and that's exactly it. It's how do you measure this stuff? You know, this is like the ongoing pitfall, but also sort of the magic and mystery of life. I say this to people all the time. It's a very simple question. Prove love exists. Prove it. How do you prove that it exists? We all feel it. I have a daughter. I have a wife. I have family, friends. I feel it. We all agree love is 100% real. But if you say, well, prove it, you can say, well, we can measure, right? Markers in the blood. Brain chemistry, brain chemistry changes, but is that thing love? And I think we would all say no. It's more to it than that. Right. But that's the marker, right? We live our lives from these things that we cannot prove, and I think that's relevant and important to keep in your mind as you're going through this stuff, because it's important. It has weight, even if it can't be proved, even if it can't be measured yet. Maybe one day, right? Right.
But that's the thing about trusting your story and trusting your process is when you say prove love to me, to me, I'm thinking, well, that's what the 99% of me feels.
Right. Yeah.
The 1% is where you can measure those biomarkers and you can measure oxytocin and serotonin levels and all that stuff. Right. That's where the 1% lives. But the 99%, that's what I feel when I feel embodied, and that's when I feel when I feel love, right?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. That's so cool. Well, Kat, let's segue into, with all of this discourse now, which I love. God, Chinese medicine, nerding out with fellow Chinese medicine people. I'm so hungry for it when it happens. I'm like, yes.
Oh, it's fun.
It is fun. So relationship coaching, this is sort of, so all of this stuff, right? This infrastructure, you're working with fertility, you're doing acupuncture, all of this stuff. And now you are moving into this program, correct? Where you're doing relationship coaching, working with couples. So talk to me.
Couples or individuals. Yeah.
Okay. Talk to me about that. Like what that looks like.
Yeah. So it's been my passion project sort of on the side for a little while now. It started out as a book I was trying to write back in 2015. So my story is that I had a boyfriend when I was 18. And then, you know, we sort of did all the things right. You know, like we moved in together, we got a dog together, we eventually got married, we bought a house, we paid off our cars, like just like boom, 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 like all the things
you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah, like type A, right?
Yeah,
like,
type A, right?
Just, that's me. This is why I can speak to the type A.
Right.
I looked at my life 12 years into that relationship, and I was just like, I don't know who I am anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't think he knows who he is anymore. And we had sort of compromised ourselves away from our core beings. And so once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it anymore. And so, you know, at first we tried to make the relationship work, and eventually it didn't. And so we ended up getting a divorce. And in that uncoupling, I started trying to own my part of the story. Like, what do I need to learn from this? You know, like, where have I felt this before? Yeah. You know, what was going on? And so in that process, I did a lot of self-work around relationships and healing a lot of actually my familial wounds. And part of that work has allowed me to step into who I am now and really sort of like living unapologetically as myself. I happen to be bi and poly, and so I have 2 boyfriends now, and love them both. And it's just amazing to see, like, when you work on your own shit, you put out this magnet, and like just beautiful stuff starts happening, right? Right. And so, like, as I started working with predominantly fertility patients, and particularly as we're sort of getting into like heart stuff, like a lot of relationship stuff comes up. And I found myself like continually being like, hey, like, maybe you should talk to somebody, or maybe you guys can take a class about communication. And like found that I was sort of like tired of sending people out for that, because I've done so much of that work myself. And so I'm creating a program. It's a 6-week online group coaching program where I take us through the Western aspects of bonding and attachment theory and working with family wounds and the psychology and neurobiology behind all of that. And so understanding the nuts and bolts of it to understanding the mind. And then I found that my background in Chinese medicine just folds so beautifully on top. Right. So, like when we talk about, like, we can nerd out about the fire element, I'm sure. Yeah. But in Chinese medicine, the fire element is all about relationships and communication and that ability to love and that heart space. Yeah. And so, like, I've been working on this project for, I don't even know how long now. And I'm going to launch that in June. So yeah, that's where people can find me in terms of like my relationship coaching. I'm not doing one-on-one coaching. I certainly do a bit of that like in the treatment room. Yeah. But on that like online coaching workshop, like that's where people can find my work about relationships.
Oh, that's great, Kat. I mean, to do that work is fantastic because one, it's needed. People need it. And, you know, I work with a lot of people, and when I talk to men and women, invariably relationship shit is on the menu most of the time. There's something that's, relationships are very difficult. There's a lot to navigate, especially as one person grows and the other doesn't. And then maybe one person stops and the other person ends up growing, and then they're just the maturation process and processing of life and evolution individually and collectively. Holy shit. What a mess, a lot of times. And so I think it's really good that you're doing the work. And I agree what you're saying, right? The Chinese medicine, the Chinese medicine lens overlaid onto this stuff, phenomenal. I'm amazed at how much of what I'm doing now is basic 5-element theory that we learned first semester, and applying it to people and saying, look, here's 5 rhythms, 5 phases that we all go through. They happen in the natural world. They happen in your body. And here how they create and destruct one another. And if we use this as a basic template, people think you're a wizard. I'm like, I would love to say that I invented this. I didn't, I definitely didn't, but it does work. And there's some very real threads there that are, they're powerful. So quick question. So when you do this work and you're going to do kind of like the online coaching format, say, but you're not working with individuals. Thus far, do you know the demographic of men versus women? Like, is it mostly women that are kind of coming to you, or have you seen men? Because in my experience, men collectively, usually they box up a little bit. They isolate more than women. Women are just a little more intuitive and emotional, and they want to dig into it. But what have you seen thus far?
It's been amazing. I would say that, like, just demographically, my writing that I put out on blogs and on social media does tend to be more geared towards women. But in my clinical practice, I have several men who come to me specifically for
that,
like, relationship wounds.
Yeah.
Right. And working through, like, attachment patterns. And so I don't know that I've had the experience of men boxing up around me. And maybe that's just like that's my secret superpower or something.
Right.
Which I'll totally own and take. But, I think we have this weird notion and we have this shame around talking about relationships. It's like, if I'm going to do something difficult, like I'm going to go roast a turkey, like I'm going to Google how to do that. Right. Like, I don't know how to change the oil in my car. So, like, if I need to do that, I'm going to call my dad.
Right.
But we somehow have this stigma in our culture where if we ask for help around relationships, that somehow means that that's broken. And that's not necessarily the case. Right. It's more about, again, like, I don't think of people or relationships as being broken. I'm here more for, like, trying to understand the story and like where can we find an empowered voice within that story. So I see a whole mix of people. It's awesome.
That's great. Yeah, that you get the full spectrum. What I've seen is, and the reason I ask is because, when I've had this question asked to me, people have said, Gray, who's your audience? And I still very confidently say, I don't really know fully because, I've got a pretty strong feminine side because I think great relationship with my mom. So I've always related to women really well. I still have lots of female friends. It's never been difficult for me to relate and to talk to them. And at the same time, some of the topics that women talk about and that men talk about, they definitely are different, but both can learn something from one another, right? Both sides can kind of like overcross. Men need some yin, women need some yang, right? Basic yin yang theory. But what I've seen is men, when they get into relationship stuff, I've had lots of friends of mine and, colleagues and clients who have come to me for relationship stuff. And like you said, I think that's the thing. There's more, at least in my group of people that I'm seeing, is that men carry more shame around the relationship. If they talk about it, it's almost as if they've done something wrong, the way they take it, like they're responsible for it. And sometimes they are. And sometimes I've tried to tell people, I'm like, look, relationships are about as hard as it gets. It's a very difficult terrain. It's not an easy thing to navigate. And I don't care how perfect the relationship is, at some point you're going to hit some pretty dark patches,
100%. Like, and I would be worried if you didn't.
Yeah. Right. I'd be like, yeah, you're full of shit, or one of you or both of you are full of shit because,
or you're in denial.
Right. There's no way that you're going to navigate life without, it's going to happen. So I think it's really cool to see, just that you're doing it. That's great. what do you think when you talked about tell me about the elemental relationship, like, so let's just say fire, when you're using that as a lens to work with people, how are you applying that, and like what languaging are you using to people to use like the fire element as a reference point in relationships? Like, tell me how you bridge that and get people to think about it, because I would love to hear that.
Yeah. So I think that's actually a hard place to begin for a lot of people. Because yes, I can talk about, nature is outside and it's reflected inside and it shows up in our lives. I think the easier place to begin with that conversation is working with attachment theory. And so attachment theory is this concept in Western psychology, and it actually came from child psychology of like the sort of care that you received in the first 7 years of your life shapes how you attach to your primary caregivers. At the time, it's typically going to be your parents. Got it. And then eventually how that shows up in your adult attachments as you grow up. And so there are 4 categories of attachment styles. There's the secure. So this is somebody who's able to, like a child who's able to, who has, like, they're seeking that intimacy from their parents, but then they're also okay to be independent. An anxious attachment style is somebody who's maybe a bit clingy, like can't be without mama. Avoidant is like, well, I'm going to just be over here in my corner. I don't really want to associate. And then an anxious and avoidant is somebody who most likely grew up in a chaotic environment and so didn't really know how to feel safe and learn how to trust. And so they're going to fluctuate between the anxious and avoidant attachment styles.
Oh, interesting.
And so, and then you can see how that plays as you grow up, right?
Yeah.
So like somebody who's secure in a relationship is going to be like, yeah, baby, like let's be intimate, like let's build our life together. But you know what? I'm still going to go out and like go to yoga class, and I'm still going to have,
that's me.
I'm going to go have the beer, and I'm going to,
yeah, that's me 100%.
Like I still have a social aspect outside of the relationship, and that's necessary for us to feel happy and healthy and good in our world, right?
100%.
An anxious person is going to be more likely to like try to meld with their partner. Yeah. Like, and they've probably gotten feedback that they're a bit clingy, right? And, they're the kind of person where it's like, oh, once Susan has a boyfriend, we just never see Susan anymore. Right. So that's going to be more of an anxious attachment style. And then the avoidant is going to be more of the person who's like, I want to feel some depth in relationship, but then I can't seem to like put down my guard. I can't, like, I have this armor and, like bad shit's going to happen anyway. So why am I even going to like bother being vulnerable in front of another person?
Fair enough. Yep.
And so like we start to see this play out in our adult relationships. And when I work with, individuals or couples, it's about sort of like, okay, so like let's identify where you are on that spectrum, because it is a spectrum. We don't fit into a box. Right. And certainly like for myself, like I've fluctuated widely from anxious to avoidant, like sometimes even within the same relationship. Like, but through work and through self-awareness and through a lot of journaling and a lot of like some deep dives and tears and,
dealing with the bullshit. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Like I can notice when I'm feeling that way and be like, oh, that's interesting. Like what is my inner child wanting right now? Right. Yeah. And can I give that to them? Or do I need to ask of this partner? Right.
And it puts you into the observation state. It removes you a little bit to watch it as a story in a sense, which is good, right? To not be fully invested as this is my core identity that cannot fluctuate, cannot move. I'm just watching a movie. I'm watching a story, seeing how things unfold. That's helpful.
Yeah. And I don't like to pathologize, like, because one of the reasons why I came up with this course is because I found that a lot of the reading I was doing about attachment theory is like, okay, identify if you're secure and insecure. And then if you're insecure, go find somebody who's secure, which just eliminates like all of that juicy, deep work that you're supposed to do on your own.
Right.
And so for me, it's less about pathologizing the insecure, but identifying them as survival mechanisms.
Right. Yep.
So if you had a patient, or if you had a parent who was maybe a bit overbearing, you needed to find autonomy. And so maybe that's how you developed your avoidant attachment style.
Right.
Or the opposite is true. Like your parent hadn't dealt with their shit, and so they were a bit avoidant, and so you felt like you needed to claim that intimacy. And so then you end up being a bit clingy, right? And so, like, there's a survival mechanism there. And so again, like, let's see what your story is.
Yep.
Right? And for me, I tend to run on the anxious side. My story is that I'm first generation Korean. So my parents are immigrants. So I sort of like lived this life where, you know, I wasn't quite Korean enough and I wasn't quite American enough. And I have a younger brother, and he felt that to an even deeper extent. He didn't really speak Korean the way that I do. And when he was a teenager, he became incredibly depressed and tried to commit suicide.
Oh, wow.
And I'm actually the one who like found him and convinced him to not do this.
Wow.
And this is me as a 16-year-old trying to navigate this, right?
Yeah.
And I did what I do best. I went into yang mode, right? I went into fixing. Like, I can do this. I made all the appointments. I took care of my brother. I was taking care of my parents to an extent. I was acting as translator because they couldn't talk to each other. And so I was the medium between. And, in my head, in my story, like the story that I tell myself is that if I wasn't there, like physically there to be with him, he would have died. And so I made sure that I was there every night when he went to sleep, and I was there every morning when he woke up.
Yeah.
And on the days that I felt really insecure, I would even sit outside the door while he was showering because I was afraid he was going to try to drown himself.
Wow.
And so for me, like, that was a survival mechanism. And so as an adult growing up, as soon as I feel someone I love feel like I'm going to lose them, then that survival mechanism gets turned on.
Yeah.
Right. And so then I start clinging, and I will literally chase my partner around the apartment asking them, what's wrong? What's going on?
Yeah.
And so as a side note, my brother is doing amazing now.
Great.
And doing amazing things.
That's very cool. That's good to hear.
And is a really cool person. And so, like, to pathologize that would not be correct, because it kept me alive, it kept my brother alive, it kept our family together. But the evolution of the human is that doesn't work for me anymore. It's actually causing so much more discomfort for me now. Yeah. That
you do have to shed it at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so shedding that was part of shedding that was the divorce with my husband.
Yeah.
Is because I was like, I no longer want to live in this particular pattern. Like, come and grow and shift with me. And he felt uncomfortable with that. And so there, like you were speaking of earlier, it's difficult when it's easy when partners want to grow and shift together. But when there's a partner who's like, hey, like, we've got to move on.
Right.
Let's do some work. And then the other one doesn't want to come along. That's a difficult story.
It is difficult. And the point that you just touched on that I agree with, and that I've talked to a lot of my friends and my close people in my life about, is collectively the human experience. Suffering is a part of it. The things that we go through, life is very difficult, and the difficult things that we are met with aren't meant to be avoided. They're the very things that shape us, that make us transform and grow. And I think what would be the point of life to go through with no hurdles, no challenges? I mean, the way I always think about life is this is a 3D simulation for, higher learning and some, soul evolution. There's something going on where we're supposed to just become more resilient, process some stuff that whatever that it's different for everybody. But I think that's exactly right. I mean, Lillian talks about this, and I've seen this in my relationships. if you are, I think you have to have enough like-mindedness, and this isn't true in friendships or romantic relationships, you have to have enough like-mindedness that you can kind of get on the same page about the large threads of life. But if you're too similar, there's no push-pull. There's no magnetic positive, negative. There's no yin-yang polarity. And I've seen that in my romantic relationships. You know, the relationship I had before my wife, very much alike. So much alike that I think in the end there was a neutralization of our polarities. You know, we had back then we could have said a lot of different things, but when I look back, I'm like, we were so fucking similar. You know, even our birthdays, 6 days apart. You know, we're just like so close, the same person more or less. And then, you know, when I look at my wife, I'm like, we have some very common threads, but very different threads. And that difference, sure, creates conflict, but it also creates the cogwheel turning. It makes movement, right? Even as sludgy as it can get for at times, and that's, which is normal, I think, in any relationship. That difference helps, right? It's like, it's almost, Lillian says this. She's like, you don't want to be too similar. You need some differences. You need some. She's like, and typically the differences are the relationships that actually last longer. Like those are the ones that actually have sustainability because you have something to work with. You have something that's going to pull you through your bullshit and vice versa. So I couldn't agree more. And I've seen that for sure in my own personal experience. I prefer difference now. I'm like, give me different, you know.
It's exciting. It's interesting.
Give me some things to work with that that have meat and potatoes, you know.
I just want to challenge you on like a tiny little bit.
Please,
there. When you say that like suffering is inevitable, I think is how you said it.
It happens. It's part of life.
Like, I think the piece that I want to flesh out is I think pain is inevitable. I don't think suffering is.
There's like a distinction, right? Between pain is like what happens, suffering is kind of a choice. Because, you know, like when we go back to like the attachment theory stuff, like we can like going through the pain of not having, my brother trying to commit suicide or, you know, like having a parent who wasn't there, like that's a pain that we can't really avoid. But if the person then chooses to continue that cycle of being anxiously attached or being avoidantly attached, like that's where the suffering comes in. For sure. Right? No, I would agree. And I feel like you're right. And I think that's an evolution to get to that place. I mean, I think there's probably some avatars who come in who are just, they've got that nailed, you know, but I think a large majority of us come in and we do have to suffer. It's almost like you have to taste it to know, fuck that, you know, like that's such not a sustainable move in the long run. And I think it's sort of a natural byproduct, right? To suffer, it's like whether you mean to or not, I think the suffering does happen. And it does inform you, you know, and I think that's where hopefully, right, you meet someone like you, or, you know, you have friends and family who love you, but hopefully you meet people in your life that can say that very thing, right? Suffering doesn't have to take place, right? The pain you can't get away from. Painful things happen, but right, how we relate and adapt to those pains are, it's up to you. How you
and
do
I'm
it.
pretty sure I heard this on your podcast. I can't remember which guest it was exactly, but I think you said eat bitter.
Like,
like medicine is going to be bitter, right? And I think that this is like relationships are medicine. You know,
I agree.
I think that, like we have these imbalances that come from relationships, but relationships can also be medicine. Like I know for sure that that's what these two men who are in my life now, like my two partners are for me, you know, like I've found security through them and they teach me every single day. And, you know, it's been bitter at times, but
of course
it's been so worth it.
And medicine, that's that I love that word, hence my podcast name, you know, lifestyle medicine, right? And the word maybe gets overused today in these circles, but I love the word and thinking of it like that. Most of, you know, my choices in my life, when I think about food, when I think about friendships, relationships, sex, activity, it doesn't really matter. Like whatever the thing is in an ideal world, the thing I'm aiming for is this going to be medicinal for me in some way? And how can I optimize my choices and my decisions to make these things more medicinal for me? And I think if you approach, it's not for everybody for sure, but I mean, at least for me, it's the thing that's made the most sense. If I can approach it that way and I can say, well, what's medicinal about this process, this friendship, this relationship, this thing, and realizing that medicine, how many of the Chinese herbs that we take taste like shit? You know, some of them are just like, oh, what the fuck is this? Like, let me spit this out. Yeah. Even though it might clean my spleen and liver out, I'm like, this isn't particularly enjoyable, but I'm going to feel better afterwards, you know? Yeah.
But that's what I love about the name of your podcast, actually, is because it invites so many different people to bring their own version of what their medicine is, you know? So like, I loved that podcast with you and the gentleman who drinks tea. Like, oh yeah, Taylor. Yeah, like Taylor Dry. That is 100% medicine. And like, now I've incorporated that into my like daily practice. I mean, I'm not like, like feng shui and beautiful about it, but like there's a mindfulness about my morning cup of tea now that I didn't have before, you know, and that can be medicine. Absolutely. And so like recognizing that medicine is not just a thing that is done to you, but a thing that you incorporate and that you integrate into your life. Like, I think that's such, there's so much power behind that. And you make it. You know, like there's a creationary force behind medicine, the way I always think about it. So I have this ongoing thing that I do, and all my buddies love it, right? But for me, it's like this completely medicinal process. And so when I hang out with one of my guy friends, and they say, like, you know, I'm like, hey, come over, let's hang out. If I do that, you know, especially if the weather's nice, I'm like, I set up the outdoor screen. I put up TV trays and recliners on the yard. I smoke ribs. I make some amazing salad that's like bolstering to like your liver and good for the season. Yeah. And, you know, I always bring out a quality spirit and, you know, like high grade tequila, high grade something, and never get tanked. Never like, oh, let's just like Chico State days and keg stands. It's never like that. But I'm like, let's set the stage with amazing food that's on point for the season, for this thing, for right now. And I mean, it's my hand. My mom has always said this to me. She's like, my mom's a little type A too. She's like, Gray, if you want to control the outcome, you have to control the process. Like, she's like, you have to have a hand in it, right? You gotta, if you want to paint the picture, you have to pick up the brush. Yeah. And so, but when I think about it, I'm like, those interactions with my buddies who, when they come over, they love it. They're like, this is great. You know, good food, good visuals, good, you know, good drink. Yeah. And it's so completely medicinal. And it's a craft, right? It's not just 100%. Yeah. I mean, it's being done to them technically, but they're interacting. We're co-creating it, right? Yeah, the stories, all these things blend into a nice picture of medicine. Yeah. And those nights, I'm recharged. I'm like, damn, that was fun. Yeah. You know, that was a blast. Like that was pretty much hitting all the nails on the head that I need to feel good about it. And I like making good food. I like watching them eat it. You know, that's like the biggest joy. Yeah. As a side note, I have to say this. I remember when we were in Five Branches, you had I think it was maybe a housewarming party, maybe maybe you just had a party, like the first or second semester in school. Yeah. And because I'm a foodie at heart, you totally spoke my language, and you made Korean ribs. Barbecue, yeah. And you were, and I mean, then I was a foodie too. Yeah. And I was like talking to somebody. I think I was talking to Paul, actually, before Paul and I were really close friends. And I'm like, I'm sitting there talking. I'm like, yeah, so this and this and this. And I took a bite of your ribs, your mom's recipe. And I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, and I was like, Kat, what's in, can I have the recipe? And you were just so like, sorry, Gray. Like, I'm not, you're like, that's a, to share that recipe. You're like, that's a family recipe. And I was like, damn you, Kat, and I respect you completely, because I'm like, I wouldn't give this up either. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's like those, you know, those medicinal moments. I mean, God, they're so important. Yeah. And I love that hasn't changed about you, as I remember those parties that you used to throw out the treehouse. Totally. With Kai and Paul. And oh yeah, they were so much fun. I mean, that was that thread, you know, Kai and I and Paul, I think in a sense, we were all kind of like, in some ways, traditionally masculine guys. Kai was in a frat. Paul was in a frat. I didn't do frats, but I played rugby, which was a frat without all the attachment bullshit. And we had this thing where we were, I hate saying this word, like, we were kind of conscious males to a degree. We weren't like the standard typical male, but we also liked the dude male stuff. And we loved celebrating. There was this thread of just like, let's get together and like get people together and do that thing. And we got to really hone in on that when we lived together, which was
we had this conversation so many times on that deck when we were just hanging out, the three of us at night looking at the hills. We would say, like, okay, the art of celebration. Like, this is an art, how do you fine tune it? And those parties were definitely an exploration of that.
Yeah.
Because it was we would always just feel so good after them. And everyone was always grateful. People were always like, because everyone's stressed out in school.
Yeah.
Everyone was always just working their asses off. And it was like, let's just hang out and socialize with people who are like-minded doing the same thing we are.
Yeah.
And it was a blast. And I'm glad you were at those parties.
Yeah.
And you enjoyed
But
them.
just to also like bring it back to like full circle, like medicine and yin yang, like what you're doing when you're setting the stage is you are creating the container. Right?
Correct.
Like that's like the yin part of it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so like when you cultivate that container, then it allows people to come in and add their energy, which is the yang.
Yes. Right? Correct.
And it's this beautiful, like, this is why it's medicine, and this is why it feels like medicine to you, because it's actually this beautiful marriage between yin and yang here.
Yeah. Like, that's a great way to think about it, and that's right. That's, that your theory is on point. yeah, right. Yin and yang, the basics, right?
Yeah.
Build the container. And it's the same principle with the body, right? Like the body has, there's a flesh and material and blood, and then there's this immaterial thing that we can't measure inside that's unique, right? Yeah. Just every soul is a little different, but they do need each other.
Yeah. And this is where the fertility piece comes in too, is like, there is this like build the container.
Yes.
Build an inviting container.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because in the end, it's like it does. You helping women to foster and create life, right? Giving them this, I don't know what you want to, not exercises, but just this process, that you're taking them through, whether it's through the coaching or through the acupuncture, herbs, lifestyle. It's the same thing, right? If you're creating a stage for cooking for people, you're creating something. You're creating life. You're creating some of that yang, that nourishing life. And that's where, that's where people start to thrive and feel amazing, which is like the high goal, right? That's in the end, that's what I'm in this for, is how can I make people feel better about what they're doing? And, honoring what's awesome about people.
Yeah.
What are you doing that's awesome and working? Because that's important. You need to keep that shit online.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, not to I love this part of our conversation, but to bring it back to...
Take it anywhere, Kat. I don't care.
Because I totally want to address the fire element piece because when we set up this call, I was just like, oh my God, I want to hear what Gray has to say about the fire element, because I've been living here in this 5 elements bubble, all by myself for the last 2 years. So I'm just I want to receive.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I think you had asked about relationships and how the fire element interplays with that. And so I'll sort of share my piece, and I want to hear your side of it too, because I'm sure you'll be able to riff off of it.
Sure.
So I think whenever I'm working with patients and we're talking about the esoteric, if I talk about yin yang, that's a weird concept for people. Mm-hmm. Or if I talk about chi and dampness and energy, that's also sort of out of reach for people. But if I talk about nature, and if I talk about their organs, it's almost like they can sort of get it conceptually a little easier. They can
grab something in that.
Yeah. So fire element, right, is about relationships. And the analogy that I like to make is that with fire, you need 3 components. You need a spark, and you need oxygen, and you need kindling.
Yes.
Right? And so the spark is that initial bam, we've met eyes and there is something happening, and I'm into you, right? There's that spark that's necessary.
For sure.
But then when you're in a relationship, you also need the kindling and the oxygen, right? So if you build up the kindling too much, you're going to smother the fire.
Right.
So that can be relatable to what we just talked about in terms of anxious attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you give it too much oxygen, it can blow the fire out.
Yes.
And so, building a fire is this beautiful dance of kindling, oxygen, and spark. And I think that's what builds a relationship. And so whenever like whenever I'm talking to patients about like what's going on in their relationship, engaging the temperature of their relationship, it's like, okay, so like is there too much kindling? Is there too much oxygen? Like where do we need to find the balance there?
Mm-hmm.
So there's the fire element.
Oh, I like that. And what's nice about that, I think, when you're using it, for one, I like that you're just saying, if I talk about nature, my patients get it more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it accessible, and it's metaphoric, which
Yeah.
most people can get behind. There's some kind of analogy there that people are like, oh yeah, great, wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
you know? God. So how well is that received when you talk about it like that, and
Mm-hmm.
you mention that kind of thing to them, and you say
Mm-hmm.
that, do people grab? Are
Yeah.
they're on board?
100%. Yeah.
That's
And
so
it's
cool.
like they get to then diagnose what's happening in their relationship, right? It's not
Right.
me telling you like this is what you need to do. It's like, oh, like I actually see this, you
Right.
know.
Right. And you're saying, here's what this looks like, and here's a metaphor for you to identify the parts of this metaphor as pieces of you and your life. I think that's the coolest part about the feng shui theory when I'm working with people, and the five elements and how they plug in, because that's exactly what the Taoists were doing with feng shui. You look at a nature scenic. I call it a snapshot.
Okay.
So if you look at a snapshot of some scenic in nature, right?
Okay.
So like if we look at water, you can have a babbling brook, you can have a roaring waterfall, you can have crashing waves, you can have frozen lakes. Water can take on a bunch of different attributes and states, right? It's very adaptable. It's one of the cool things about having water in your environment is that it keeps that signal on and running. But when we look at that, that's kind of the piece where you say like, okay, so if you look at these different snapshots, the Taoists, when they look at feng shui, they say each one of those snapshots, of those pictures, can be states or experiences in your life. Sometimes water is cold and immovable, and if you fall or come into contact with it, it hurts, right? Or just the magnitude and majesty of a roaring waterfall that's 300 feet tall. Like that snapshot is going to be how water feels in relation to different experiences in your life. So I think when you're taking this thing about fire, right, and you're saying, so these three things, A, B, and C, have to be present for fire to happen. I mean, that is probably one of the most down-to-earth ways you can talk about this stuff, five-element theory. It makes it real for them, and you get that subconscious cue into them that what happens in the natural world ties to what's happening in your life, in your body.
Yeah.
So it's so good. I'm so glad that you're integrating these things like the fire element, and you're right, not just to like push the theory because you love it, but because it actually, I think it has weight in terms of how effective this stuff will be as you go down the road too.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to be really good.
Yeah. And I just think it's a good lens to have on, because for me, it's practicing Chinese medicine is less and less becoming about the needles and the herbs. Like it's becoming more and more like, I am so curious about you.
Yeah.
And I want to know what your story is. And I hope that by mirroring my curiosity about the person sitting in front of me, by mirroring my curiosity about you, that you're able to get curious about yourself, right?
Right.
And then we get to sort of talk about like, okay, so what's the story you've been telling yourself? And is that actually true? And if it's not true, like, has it served?
Yeah.
And does it still serve?
Right. Really important questions to be asking.
Yeah.
I mean, in the big context of life is, right, is what you're doing sustainable, right? It goes back to what you were talking about before, the shedding. Mm-hmm. Is this programming, this operating system that I'm running that was very functional in years past, is it still doing what it's supposed to now? You do need to update. You do need to, and I think in these threads, I love that the things that you're talking about, they all kind of stack on one another, right? Doing that without the shame, without the guilt of, oh, I'm a piece of shit for having done that or for living that out continually in new iterations with new people. Just as a side tangent note to support this, my daughter was in the hospital from for a month for her health stuff, and she's great, no underlying conditions. In the end, she's doing fantastic, and she's thriving and happy and beautiful. But it fucked me up. I mean,
Absolutely.
I was just not right in the head or in the heart, and it just got me. And I ended up not for recreation. It was a fully like I sat in an ayahuasca ceremony, and one of the things that was dropped in on me, I feel like that was gifted to me, was I was shown various things in my life during that journey, during that trip. And I was shown all these different things, my daughter being in the hospital, things I've done, choices I've made. And for whatever reason, in that space, for the first time ever, whatever was dialoguing with me, whatever you want to call it, Mother Aya, the consciousness of the plant. I don't know how it works fully, but what I was shown was there was no judgment in the story. It was like, here's a story, and this has been your story, your life, the things you've been doing. And right over here, a quarter turn is a better way. And there's nothing wrong or bad about the ways you've been doing it. Here is just a new path and a new direction for you to walk down. And be okay with that. And it was almost like, as the story was being told to me, I could feel there was no judgment in it. It's like exactly what you just said, right? It's almost like you're giving a mirror for the person. I felt like that's what the plant was doing for me. It was just saying, it was mimicking like, here, I'm going to show you how to not judge by not judging you. When I show you your past, when I show you, and it was so helpful. And I think however we get that into our heads, to touch on these threads that you're talking about, the no shame, right? Shedding of the old bullshit patterns, whatever they are, for men, women, and everyone in between, whatever that is. I mean, God, such a really important thread to life. I mean, it's so important. I mean, I couldn't stress that enough. And I think you get it too. It's part of, I think, why you're doing what you're doing, right? You've seen the magnitude of how important this is.
Yeah, and what a beautiful opening of a portal for you, because I'm sure from that opening came this hugely creative process. Right? Like now you are writing a different story.
100%. I mean, I've still got my shit that I'm processing and learning, but yes,
of course,
it opened up a whole new thread of evolution. I think it's just like anything. Once you feel something or experience something, you can read about it theoretically, and you can hear it, and that in your mind gets it. You're like, that makes sense. But when you experience it and feel it for the first time, it's like, okay, now I've got a baseline of how to actually do things a little different because I felt it. It actually it was embodied. It was in me. I felt it. It came through me, and it became way easier. Like most things, once you experience it, it's like, oh, okay. Something to work with. Yeah. Oh man, Kat, this was an excellent conversation. This was really good. I really enjoyed, first of all, catching up with you and seeing your smiling face and hearing what you're doing. I mean, I love the work that you're doing. You write really well. I come from a family of English majors and journalism majors, and reading your stuff, even your posts on Facebook, just the content you write. I love the way you write. So I want to just, acknowledge that I love your writing, and the way you're telling your stories in your writing has gotten me thinking about things differently. So I know my podcast has opened some things for you, but your writing has opened things for me. So
so much.
You're welcome. And
that's beautiful.
Yeah. And to close this, Kat, the thing I kind of ask of my guests when I'm wrapping up an interview is, parting words that you would want to give to the audience, people, the real-time baseline practical things that people can do if they were to never see you or work with you again. Like, what would be the gem that you would kind of give them? And then the basic details after that are just your social media and stuff where people can actually stalk you and and follow your good works.
Oh geez, how do I make it like a small thing?
No pressure, Kat. Just put all of your medicine into one sentence. Go.
This is my problem with both my treatments and my writing is I always run over time and run over the Instagram word limit. But essentially, stay curious.
Yeah.
If we can stay in this place of curiosity, that automatically pulls us out of judgment. It pulls us out of shame.
Yeah.
It pulls us out of fear. I think that if we can just stay curious, if there's any lesson I have learned that continues to hold like in any scenario, it's just if I stay in my curiosity, I can be open.
Yeah.
So
important.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
wise words. I will take them. And I'm sure my audience will as well. And then, how do we find you, Kat? How can people, what's your, website, social media, Facebook, whatever you like people to follow you on?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram, and I'm pretty prolific on Instagram. So I'm at Empowered Curiosity.
Okay.
My website is empoweredcuriosity.com, and that's where you'll find all the info about my upcoming course called the Heart Lab. And
great name. That's a great name. It's a great name, Heart Lab.
And then for your audience, I'd love to offer a coupon code. So if any of you guys want to take the Heart Lab, use the coupon code LifestyleMed, and you'll get $25 off.
Very cool.
And yeah, that's me.
I love it. Yeah, and I think everyone else will too after listening to this conversation. Well, Kat, thank you for doing this interview. It's great to see you. I would love to have you on again. A lot of my guests, I feel like there's a lot of repeat type things we could do. So I feel like we kind of touched the surface of a lot of different things.
Let's do it again.
Yeah. At some point we'll get you back on here. But yeah, thank you so much for doing it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gray. And I love the work that you're doing as well. And so you are now my favorite podcast. Like, no joke.
I appreciate
that. Look forward to it.
Thank you. That's very cool. All right, Kat. Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care.